move the furniture on us. Yes. So, no, actually, this time I rented it for long enough not to have that happen. But you have General Clark is on. Okay, very good.
I'm up.
So, well, as I said, we did the air, land, sea in the morning, and now we're doing the more complicated sort of cyber. Not that the others aren't complicated, but these are the ones that need a lot of attention because they often are left behind when you're talking about the major, the land, air, sea issues. And one was cyber warfare and information warfare. The next one is critical. It's the military industrial complex that the Ukraine still has. What can be added to that, and in some sense, and is there anything that we can do in the future about this? And the panel that we've assembled represents the best of the best on that particular issue. And so, without a lot of delay, the only thing that I can say is that Ambassador Kirk Volker has been a very good friend of Ukraine's throughout this entire process. And he and General Breedlove had said if we had only had a couple of those A-10s 9 days into the war, as those tanks were stuck on the road, we might have done a lot more damage to the Russians, and they wouldn't be in Donbass right now because they wouldn't have enough tanks to do that. So anyway, Ambassador Volker, a pleasure to have you here, sir.
Great. Thank you very much, Walter. And it's an honor for me to be here. And I would just say that it's still not too late to give them A-10s. That it would still be useful. And in comparison to the F-16, there are already trained Ukrainian pilots. The maintenance is easier. The logistics tail is easier. Flying them is easier. So it would be doable if we wanted to. And we have dozens and dozens and dozens of them sitting in the Arizona desert doing nothing. So with that, we're here to talk about Ukraine's defense industry, which is a big and broad and complex topic. So I'm glad I'm moderating rather than speaking to it. And we have a great panel here to help discuss it. On the screen, you see Wes Clark, former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. We have Steve Blank here, and we have Ivan, whom you all know. So I'm going to just say, I think there are different pieces of this that we should try to get through in the time that we have. The first question, and I'm going to run through a list and then turn it over to each of our panelists. But the first question that I think people would like to understand is what capacity does Ukraine have now to supply its own military forces as they fight to defend the country against Russia? And what do they not have? So what is the current state of play in the war fighting? Second is, what can we say about Ukraine's efforts to innovate into new areas? And here we are thinking about cyber, and we're thinking about drones, and we're thinking about counter drones. So what about innovation in Ukraine for new types of warfare? The third is, what is the potential for outside defense industry, US or European, other country defense industry, to partner with Ukrainian defense industry, either inside Ukraine or outside Ukraine, in order to produce more for Ukraine? I have a question about philosophy. Should Ukraine be moving to all Western standards and all Western equipment? Or should we be helping to produce Soviet standard equipment because they still have a lot of equipment that they can use that ammunition for? And then finally, if we have time, I'd like to get to the issue of the organization of defense industry in Ukraine and a history of corruption and essentially having a slush fund in the defense industry of Ukraine. So how does that affect everything? But let's save that for last if we get there. And let's start with what Ukrainian defense capabilities are now. And let's turn to our Ukrainian on the panel who has the deepest insight into this.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm serving now as a head of Ukrainian Defense Manufacturers Association, which is integrating about 60 companies from private and public sector, including those companies which belong to state enterprise Ukroboronprom. And we believe that our function is to coordinate the activities of those companies to maximally combine capacities and capabilities to have the final ready for deployment weapons to be supplied for armed forces of Ukraine. So basically, there are three baskets of issues I would like to address during my report. So traditionally, any war conflict creates for defense industry threats, because something could be destroyed, opportunities, because usually during war, any government spend much more money for procurements, and of course, challenges. Because sometimes you still have bottlenecks which remain during the manufacturing or supply chain process, which have to be addressed. Otherwise, you will not be able to get a final weapon on the battlefield. So the threats are quite obvious because several defense manufacturers, primarily from state-owned factories, been struck by missiles during the first couple of months of full-scale assault of Russia against Ukraine. Of course, those strikes disrupted supply and manufacturing chains, but only temporarily. This is very important. So basically, after some period of time, like 2-3 months, defense manufacturers were able to reinstate the operation, to evacuate and relocate the capacities, primarily, of course, on the western part of Ukraine, which is farther distance from actual battlefield and front line. And of course, you know, the Russian capacities of strikes, which right now significantly diminished due to capacity of air defense system of Ukraine, which will be recently significantly boosted. So, and also the moderate effect of those strikes could also be explained because Russia primarily targeted state-owned factories. But the true fact is that about 50 to 60% of components of the most prominent Ukrainian weapons, like anti-ship missile Neptune or MLRS Vilha or anti-tank guided missile Stugna, are produced not only by state-owned companies. This is a lot of components, like up to 50% of components are being produced by private companies. And those companies were not attacked. And that was a good story for Ukrainian defense industry. So basically, what we can say more, you know, the recent development of Ukrainian defense sector, the howitzer 155 millimeter caliber howitzer Bogdana. This is a self-propelled howitzer, which was successfully deployed during liberation of Snake Island. It shot projectiles in the distance of 42 kilometers from shore of Ukraine, and effectively at least 25 to 30 projectiles hit the Russian air defense system on Snake Island, and they were forced to retreat. Basically, that was a huge and a very important foundation for liberation of Snake Island, and that foundation was laid by Ukrainian-made artillery piece. That factory has received additional orders right now. It has relocated to Western Ukraine, and we could expect that Ukraine receive several dozens of those self-propelled howitzers 155 millimeter Bogdan in the nearest future. Of course, I cannot disclose exact number, which is
you said that's a 155 millimeter?
Yes, it's 155 millimeter. Moreover, the same factory received right now a bunch of requests from Ministry of Defense to produce spare parts for Western type of artillery and NATO type of artillery, which has been supplied to Ukraine. This is something about the challenge, which I will address a bit later in my report now. So overall, we can say that Ukrainian defense manufacturer is up and running and has a pretty good perspective. And it's already combat proven because, as you all probably aware, that cruise ship Moskva was sunk by Ukrainian-made anti-ship missile Neptune. And that Ukrainian-made anti-ship missile was, I would say, 100% nationally, locally, domestically made. And the most important part, like self-defense homing, was made by Ukrainian company. The jet engine was made by Ukrainian company. So basically, most of the parts were made in Ukraine, and those anti-ship missiles could continue to be produced even further. As to emerging opportunities, I have already mentioned that significant state funds been directed right now for financing of defense procurement from domestic suppliers, which is very good. At the account of those advance payments for future supplies, the factories were able to invest into tool machinery, into new facilities, because they have to relocate. So basically, everything what was destroyed before during the attacks right now is being renovated on the new places and with new equipments which being bought at the account of those prepayments for final products which were received. So this is not direct but indirect investments into development of Ukraine defense capabilities, which is extremely good in my opinion. We are facing right now a huge problem with ammunition, high caliber artillery ammunition, as if I'm talking about Ukrainian army forces, because the rate of usage of shells and projectiles and rounds, artillery rounds overall, is far more larger than the capacities of the factories which enable them to produce. Moreover, of course, you know that we keep using a lot of so-called Soviet-type artillery systems, which are different in caliber of NATO systems. So we have to receive ammunition for Soviet types. Currently, a lot of things being sourced from Eastern European countries like Bulgaria, Poland, Romania, but even those both stocks and capacities right now are on the edge of possibilities of production, or those being already depleted. So Ukraine right now is on the way of setting its own artillery ammunition production. Specifically, we are almost ready to start shells production at the rate 200,000 pieces per year. But I'm talking about only shells because we have problems with propellant. And this is a challenge. This is a bottleneck which have to be addressed probably together, because the propellant, I'm talking about gunpowder, is a huge deficit right now in the global market. And if we are able to build a factory for production of a shell, of a projectile, if we're able to fill it with explosive, if we're able to produce fuels, even if we're able to make a cartridge for propellant, the propellant itself is a huge problem. And in this respect, we expect that our partners, our allies will help Ukraine to liquidate this bottleneck, which really is a hurdle for large-scale ammunition production of our own domestic production. Another challenge, of course, is government spendings, because right now the pace of spending is good in regards of that it enables the companies producing defense items to reinvest those money in developing its own capacities. But if all of a sudden those orders of money will not be invested by Ukraine in the same amounts in future, those capacities will be either standing in way, or those projects for modernization of industrial base will not be completed. Of course, everything what I say right now is from defense industry perspective. You hear a lot of things which lay totally in business domain, but I think that my role was to deliver your perspective from our standpoint as an association who is taking care both that we have to erect Ukrainian capacities for production of defense items. Talking about corruption, which is a very important item in our relationship with the world, negative item, of course. I could report about positive things, not in regards that we say that we have zero tolerance to corruption during war. This is obvious, and it's been clearly stated by our president. I would like to report some deregulation initiatives which have been successfully implemented by Ministry of Defense. As you may remember, during previous years, the transfer of military and dual use items were exclusive privilege of 6 state-owned companies within enterprise Ukроборонпром. And that was an obvious source of corruption because there was no competition in that area. Currently, those licenses and authority to transfer to Ukraine dual use and military use items been given to a few private companies too, who introduced a significant competition more or less in that sector. And all, as you know, the competition is the enemy of corruption because it's immediately giving better terms and faster terms and better logistics for those scarce items which Ukraine is desperately needs right now. I'm talking about deliveries from Bulgaria, Romania of ammunition from those stocks. And this is a good initiative in regards of fighting the corruption, deregulation. So this is a short report, and I will be ready to address and answer more questions should you have those.
Thank you very much. Very, very useful, very informative. Let's turn to Wes now, who's on the screen. And Wes, I'd like to ask you to address the topic that we're discussing, which is the defense industry of Ukraine and the production of defense material for Ukraine. But I would feel like we are missing out if we don't ask you to give us a little bit more general perspective that you have on Ukraine's, how Ukraine is doing in the war, what we are doing, and what we should all be doing now. So I'd love to get that general perspective in addition to comments about the industry. So Wes, over to you, folks.
Well, Ambassador Kurt, thank you very much. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I just couldn't make it happen today. Walter, thank you very much for accommodating me. Look, I think the end is in sight for this conflict, at least temporarily. And I say that because it appears thus far that the Russian offensive is not able to penetrate. And Ukraine has the capacity, to some extent, to conduct an offensive operation to the south. It doesn't have the capacity that I would like it to see, because I think if you want successful negotiations, you must threaten Crimea. And it's not clear yet to me that the combat power is adequate to do that. As Ambassador Volker said, A-10s would be mighty helpful. ATACMs, drones, more tanks, etc. But the policy decision that's come out of the West is, I think, becoming increasingly clear. It's to support Ukraine to regain as much of its territory as it can, and then in order to save Ukraine, try to stop the fighting after this counteroffensive, even if it leaves Russian forces in place in Ukraine. And I can look at Ivan's face and see that that's not a very satisfactory outcome. It's not a very satisfactory outcome for any of us. But as I read the tea leaves, that's what's going to happen because of because of concerns that about escalation. So I can't get into sort of debating the administration's policy, but Kurt, you asked me to sort of say what I think, what I'm afraid is happening, and that's what I'm afraid is happening.
Yeah. Let me jump in on that, Wes, if I can. Let's make this a little bit of a dialogue on that point, because I think one thing I would urge the Ukrainians is to make sure they use the right vocabulary in communicating to the administration, because the administration is signaling that they don't think Ukraine should take Crimea. And I think the way to respond to that is what's important is for Ukraine to isolate Crimea. And there are 3 key nodes for this. There's the landline of communication in the south, the southern land corridor. There is the Kerch Strait Bridge, and there's the naval base at Sevastopol. And I think if the Ukrainians could be more precise, saying we understand it would be a waste of resources to try to overrun Crimea, but we do need to isolate it so that the Russian forces that are there are not going to be supported with the adequate supplies. That, I think, was something that the administration probably could get behind. So Wes, back to you.
Yeah, I think that Crimea is the key to getting successful diplomacy in this case. And if Crimea isn't threatened, isolated, partially occupied, the land bridge cut, et cetera, that you don't have the leverage to bring Putin back to the negotiating table. That's what I'm afraid of. But, you know, there's classified information out there. Maybe, I hope, people in the Pentagon see it in a slightly different, more hopeful perspective. I don't have any assurance of that. I'm just telling you what I think is happening. So what that means is that starting this fall, we've got to think about how Ukraine rebuilds its industrial base, starting with rail, then going to hydrocarbons, then munitions and high technology, and salvaging or working with the sort of automotive sector that remains in Ukraine to produce armored vehicles. I think one critical area of Ukraine that really has an advantage is software. I think you have wonderful software engineers, wonderful innovation in Ukraine. Now, how can that be used for Western industry? So that's a question. And to do that, you're going to need a vetting process. So I think the way to do this is not to necessarily look for manufacture in Ukraine of Western defense articles, but look for Western defense manufacturers to rely on Ukrainian expertise in the production of their own defense articles. Ukraine is going to have to shift to NATO standards. Now, I would strongly advocate that there is no security guarantee for Ukraine that's admissible except NATO admission. And Ukraine's condition for going along with the pressure from France and Germany should be NATO admission. You want us to stop? Fine. Make us part of NATO. You don't want to make us part of NATO? We ain't stopping. And by the way, we want EU membership also, because Ukraine's already had security assurances. And, you know, Europe is it's a funny place. I mean, as long as there's one country between you and Russia, you feel safe. So Poland knows it's next. Germany, despite Chancellor Scholz, not too concerned. France, even less concerned. So got to really understand the psychology of Europe. So software engineering, number one. Drones and high technology equipment, number two. There's no reason why Ukraine can't access Western high technology optics, cameras, communications, chips right now, and build superior drones at lower cost than anyone in the West can provide. Counter UAS, also, that's a radio frequency problem, maybe a high energy laser problem, but you've got Ukrainians who understand optical telephony, and all lasers derive from optical telephony. So we've got to move to the future. And these articles of defense are your strong points. Can you duplicate Bulgaria's ability to produce AK-47s? Yeah, but who cares? That's not what's important. What's important is you have the high technology edge. You also have tremendous residual of expertise in Dnipro on rockets and missiles. And this needs to be exploited immediately. You can go longer range. I keep saying to people, Kurt, that it's only going to be a matter of a few more weeks before Ukraine has its own ATACMS.
That would be great. That would be great. Tell me, Wes.
But nobody told me that. I'm just saying that that's my expectation, because Ukraine is very technologically advanced.
Wes, if we can, we only have like 8 minutes on this section.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had 10 minutes all to myself.
Oh, no, you do, but I want to ask you a few more questions. So what is the rationale for not providing ATACMS and 300-kilometer range shells? And what difference would it make if they were provided?
Well, I think the reason that you need these longer ranges is, first, because the Russians have moved their fuel ammunition depots and assembly points out of HIMARS range. They know what the HIMARS range is, the same as we do. And so they simply move back. Yes, it makes it more inconvenient, but it also protects them from HIMARS to some extent. And secondly, if you had these, you also have the ability then to use fire as a mobile reserve. You keep your weapons further back, safely out of sight, out of range, and then you can shift those fires across the battlefield more responsively. That's what we need. Why are they not provided? Because we've approached this entirely in an incremental fashion. The administration likens it to sort of boiling the frog. Okay, Mr. Putin's in the pot. And he said, boy, if you turn on the heat, you try to boil me, I'm going to use nuclear weapons. But so we didn't turn the heat up full. We just are slowly cooking him. Now that was the theory. The problem is that we're taking a lot of casualties, a lot of losses, and burning up a lot of Western consensus in the process. And so far, we haven't persuaded Mr. Putin that he's being cooked. He thinks he might still win. So that's our problem. So we've got to we don't have to depart from incrementalism. We just have to take a little bit faster look at this. For example, we should have F-16 pilots being trained right now. It's going to take 7 to 9 months. Put them in training. ATACMS crews being trained right now. You don't have to make the decision, but in June, when you need the ATACMS, then you've got people who are ready. When you make the decision, it happens. What we would call colloquially the flash to bang time here is too long. Between the decision making and the time the system gets in Ukraine, it's too long. So thus far, Ukraine has managed to succeed in its defense despite this. But we've got to do better at that. This is all from the Pentagon.
Wes, one more for you. What about the availability of ammunition, particularly for the artillery systems and the 155s? Because the burn rate is far higher than the production rate. So are we doing enough to increase production? Can we increase production? Are there other ways in which to satisfy this?
Of course, we can increase the production, but we have to have done it. And it's just now being done. We're very slow on mobilizing our industrial base. I don't know what we were thinking of, except that I have talking to retired generals who thought that maybe you would only fire like 50 rounds a day per tube. I know from having been in the Debaltseve area right after the battle that Ukrainian artillery was firing 600 rounds per tube per day. And the other thing, in addition to ammunition, is artillery barrels. These barrels are they're only made to last for a few thousand rounds. So if you're firing 600 rounds per day, after 10 days, you need a new barrel. So got to be able to produce the ammunition and the artillery barrels, as well as the tank main gun ammunition in Ukraine. But that's a near-term problem. I don't have any visibility over the scrambling that's going on in Ukraine to do this. And maybe Ivan can tell us, I mean, how much has Ukraine upped its own military industrial production since 2014? I see in the future building islands of air defense within which that military industrial production and the refineries and so forth can be concentrated. And but that's for the future. We don't have that air defense yet.
Very good. Anything else, Wesley, you want to touch on, or I want to ask Ivan to come back in on a point, if not.
Security. Look, I want to tell our Ukrainian friends, we trust the Brits. We have a secure relationship with the Brits, the Canadians, the Australians, the New Zealanders. We don't trust fully others because they're not in our security system. What Ukraine has to do is convince us that you can join and become closer to our security system. In other words, vetting. We vet by financial disclosure and by polygraph. And Ukraine, if it can do that and meet the right standards, and be certified by US agencies, would have access to more technology, as well as being able to participate more with Western technology. And I think I should leave it at that, Kurt. Thank you.
Yes. And just on your point about we can ramp up production if we want, I just remind everyone that 3 years ago, we used the Defense Industrial Production Act in order to produce ventilators. So why we're not doing that to produce actual defense articles, which is what the law is for, I'm kind of wondering about. But I'd suggest that it is doable since we just did it.
Kurt, let me finish. Let me just take one more minute before we go to Steve. And I know he's got a lot of things to say and I want to hear them. But, you know, the overall posture of this administration was set in 2010, 2011. It was when the United States decided to pivot to Asia. And at that point, the United States government essentially worked an agreement with Russia. And that agreement said, you can do what you want in Europe. I mean, within reason, we want to have a good relationship with you. We tried to do a reset. We used the wrong language for reset. But, we'd like to have a good relationship with you. But we're interested in Asia and space. Don't mess with us there. And so year after year, we lost the bubble. The United States can't manage China without strong relationships with Europe. Europe is the base for the United States in its dealings in the world. And this administration still having difficulty coming to terms with that, in my personal view. I think the idea that you could stabilize Mr. Putin and then turn and face China is like the dog chasing the car. Lots of barking, you catch the tire of the car, and then what do you do to the car? And with China, we're enmeshed in trade agreements. We're not going to invade, use nuclear weapons, or smash them. So what's the point? We need a strong diplomatic, economic relationship with Europe. Ukraine should be part of that.
Yeah, for sure. The strategy used to be simplified as win, hold, win. And the first one of those is win. So, Ivan.
Yeah, I would like to briefly comment on two pieces, on ammunition, locally, domestically produced, and barrels. I start with barrels. I have mentioned that we produce self-propelled howitzers Bogdana, 152 caliber, 52 caliber length, and it was capable to shoot projectiles from the distance 42 kilometers. That particular piece has already made 1,500 shooting, and the barrel is still in good condition. It means that we are capable to produce high quality barrels. And right now we received requests from Ministry of Defense of Ukraine for replacement barrels for those artillery pieces which have been delivered to Ukraine by our partners. And we are capable to produce them. It's the same barrel, more or less. But if you make a copy from the one which is physically given to us, that copy will have to go for lengthy trials in order to be certified in Army Forces of Ukraine. So we believe if we enhance and improve military technical cooperation between United States and United Kingdom, who was original producers of those howitzers, which will be given to Ukraine, including 777s, which are massively used right now, we can easily copy and produce domestically the barrels for those howitzers, and they will not require any certification because they're going to be produced according to original drawing of the designer. So this is a subject which we're going to be addressing together with the Embassy of Ukraine and with other partners. Regarding ammunition, I have already briefly mentioned that we will be able by the end of 2023 to produce up to 200,000 pieces on Ukrainian territory of shells. But in order to make that shell as an artillery round, we need propellant, gunpowder, because all the metal parts, explosive and fuse, we can do domestically in necessary number. But our bottleneck is propellant. And as everywhere in the world, by the way, right now, propellant is a huge deficit. So given that United States, we have Northrop Grumman, who is a huge producer of propellant gunpowder in the United States, would help Ukraine, we will be able to make a full cycle, complete artillery round, including for Soviet type artillery, which is widely and successfully used by our troops. And this is essential. So it's not only about financial or military aid, it's also about management in military technical space. And that's thing which I would like to address from this on this conference.
That's a very important point. And I want to be specific here. You mentioned Northrop Grumman as the key U.S. industry company for propellant. And which is the company that makes the barrels for the howitzers?
Mm-hmm.
Which
one? This company is from Kramatorsk. Kramatorsk heavy.
No, the American company that you need the technological.
Oh, yeah. Actually, this is not American. This is United Kingdom company. This is BAE System, who is a designer for 777s. Okay. And should they provide us with a technical documentation how to produce their barrel, we will be easily to produce in massive numbers on the territory of Ukraine, and those barrels will not require any sort of certification as the trials in Ukraine because they're built, produced according to original drawings. Talking about United States, we have M109 howitzers in massive numbers. They also require replacements. We have Paladins. We have crabs from Poland. We call it zoo, you know. When you go to zoo, you see a bunch of animals, and this is how our artillery is made right now. We have full assortment of globally made artillery pieces, and all of them require spare parts. And it's not only howitzers, it's other parts too, and we can do everything.
Yeah, I think I'm going to steal that, although I'm going to call it the Noah's Ark approach. Everybody in the West says only two. All right, Steve. Yeah.
Okay. I hope I can justify General Clark's confidence in my remarks. I'm going to try to answer Kurt's questions. You've heard a lot of already that answers many of them, but I'm going to try to add to the discussion. Let me begin by recounting to you an anecdote from my misspent youth when I first started working in this town in 1978, probably before some of you were born. I was working as a consultant, or what we used to call a Beltway bandit, and we had a retired Air Force general on over there, and we were doing targeting studies. You know, where would be the best place to drop a nuke on the Soviet Union? And gee, Leningrad made a lot of sense, for example. And he said to me, "You know, son," I was 28. "If there's a war, I want a hot production line." And you know, youth that I was, I thought, okay, right, sure. But he was right. What we need, and as Kurt has alluded to this, is a hot production line, not only in Ukraine, to the best of Ukraine's ability. And as you've noticed, Ukraine's ability is considerable, despite terrible circumstances. But we need it here, we need it in Europe. And what's lacking here and what's lacking in Europe is is a combination of political intelligence, not intelligence about Russia, but intelligence in general, and political will. Same is true in Europe, maybe even more so. So those are the impediments here to achieving the kinds of things that Ukraine can do, either by itself or in tandem with its potential allies. And as General Clark said. Second, what are the prospects for innovation, particularly with drones and cyber? I can't say what the potential for innovation with cyber is, but Turkey, for example, and remember, Turkey is a NATO ally with all the difficulties going on. Turkey is helping Ukraine build corvettes and drones. We've seen what these weapons can do already. Now, for example, I've talked a lot today about breaking up the blockade, but they could really, especially if you can get longer range precision strike on these corvettes, or capabilities of that sort into the drones, take out the Russian fleet, even at Sevastopol and Novorossiysk. And we've seen that Ukraine is capable of attacking some of these targets. Certainly they can attack the Kerch Bridge, for example, as well. So we can see that Ukraine on its own has impressive capabilities, even under the worst circumstances. What's more, there are allies who are capable of working with it. Now, it has also been reported, I don't know to what degree this is true, that Israel is now considering giving Ukraine weapons. I have no idea how much of this is authentic or true or not, but think about the Israeli example. I've told Walter over and over again, you got to learn from what the Israelis did, because they were attacked upon becoming independent, and they've now built up a major military capability and highly respected defense technologies. IAI, for example, if you ask anybody in the business, he'll tell you how good they are. They can give Ukrainians missile defense technology that nobody in the world has. Now, I don't know that the Iron Dome or whatever other systems they have like that are applicable or usable in Ukraine, or how long it would take to get Ukrainians up to speed on that. But it's a lot faster than the kind of propaganda we're seeing in the press, given what we've seen Ukraine be able to do. So already we have two allies of the United States, one in NATO, one in CENTCOM now, who are able to give Ukraine, or actually giving Ukraine capabilities. The same is true for our allies. Now, I mean, I'll give you an example of what's missing. Today's paper and Friday's paper also reported that Secretary Wormuth of the Army is now saying, well, we're not going to be able to get you the Abrams tanks till next year. When, you know, that's not going to do anybody any good. Even if they were trained on it, you have to have the tank. So what's the point of this? Germany is having real difficulty even getting the Leopard tanks it has out of mothballs. And, NATO altogether still thinks, because its policies have not really changed, that it can avoid the war and it doesn't have to generate defense capability, even if they have laws similar to what, to the Defense Production Act on the books. Let me remind you that in 1941, the U.S. Army trained in Louisiana with broomsticks. This is famous. By the end of the war, we're putting out 50,000 planes a year. And everybody understood that the United States had this capability. Hitler did, that's why he attacked, he thought, because I can attack them early. Stalin certainly understood this. And it's very possible the Soviets could not have won, let alone the other allies, without American logistics. The Soviet army fought on American food and on American mechanized vehicles. So the point is there has to be the political will for the allies to help Ukraine meet its defense obligations and furthermore to win the war, because only by winning the war will it have security. Curtis talked about some sort of partial way station of isolating Ukraine strategically. Crimea, isolating Crimea is from Russia. I beg to disagree. I think, as Ben Hodges said this morning, Ukraine has to take Crimea. They don't have to go in a attrition warfare land by land, but Crimea can be taken, provided they have the capabilities to isolate the Russian air and naval capabilities, which, as we have seen, have not distinguished themselves in this battle and are poorly led, and also not going to get the kinds of defense support that Ukraine is going to get, because the Russian defense industry, as you know, has major issues, which are only partially being reported. So that's the case. Now, standards. It's obvious. Ukraine has to go with NATO standards. Soviet standards have shown to be inefficient, ineffective. And it's not just a question of taking the manual of Soviet standards. You don't take technology without taking some of the culture that's embodied in the technology to begin with. This is a mistake that a lot of governments and analysts have made. I can simply take somebody's technology, which is more advanced than mine, and just plug it in and play. No. If you want the technology, you're going to have to get the values that are embedded in it. And that also means honest corporate structures. Because a corrupt defense network cannot produce to NATO standards. And what we have seen is that the corrupt Russian defense industry can't even produce to Russian standards. You laugh, but think about how many men have died as a result of this. And that's Russians as well as Ukrainians, men, women, and children, and so on. Furthermore, it corrodes the political will to victory, because the first response of all these people is, I got mine jacked, and I'm not going to worry about you or anybody else. And if they die, they die. As Stalin would say to Zhukov, don't spare the men. No, that's famously, he did that. And that's how they went through minefields. When General Eisenhower asked Zhukov, how did you take out German minefields? So we sent men through them. I can imagine what Eisenhower's reaction must have been. But that's the old Soviet technique, and it's still the Russian one with the myth that we have u nas людей, we have a lot of people. And so what if they die? They signed up for it or whatever. Yeah. The point is, defense industry cannot simply be isolated as a merely technical artifact of the strategy required to win the war. Defense industry is an embodiment of the political standards and culture of the society. Ukraine has made it clear it wants to join the West. That means the EU and NATO. And as was made clear this morning, as Ben Hodges said, if there's no security, there's not going to be investment. It's another reason why Crimea has to be recovered. If there's going to be corruption or sloth in the defense industry, there's not going to be investment. The same is true for energy. And let me conclude with this. I've talked, and Walter has hosted at other panels of his, people trying to do business in energy in Ukraine with the best intentions, and they ran into every kind of conceivable obstacle. And I've been in meetings with this also going back 30 years. We have the means to integrate Ukraine with the rest of Europe in energy as well as in defense industry. And energy is vital to defense industry. We have the structural networks, the three C's operation. Yeah, whatever the Polish ambitions for Intermarium are, the point is you can build connectivity from the Baltic all the way to the Black Sea and to the Adriatic, both in terms of pipelines and interconnectors, and I've written about this in the Balkans, but it's happening elsewhere as well. It can be done with high tech, it can be done with computers and cyber and so forth. This needs to be deployed to its maximum effect, and it's not being done. I know from talking to the State Department officials in the Trump administration that little or nothing has been done, even though Trump personally gave them several $1 million. 3 C's is one thing. Second, Ukraine has to get its energy house in order, because when Ukraine gets its energy house in order, it will be able to export, not just to satisfy its own, hopefully growing needs, but to export. And what's more, Ukraine will have the capacity to be a major producer, at least regionally, in terms of renewables, which are urgent. I don't have to explain to this audience why. All that says that Ukrainian capabilities are there. What is needed is the proper organization of will, and not only on the part of Ukraine, but on the part of the United States and of its allies. The idea that Germany takes 6 months to figure out that it can send Leopards only if the United States does is not an answer. And they still can't do it. They even had to fire the Minister of Defense to get some action. The fact that the allies and they could not supply Ukraine between September, or maybe even earlier, of last year, and now is probably a major reason why we have not yet seen that Ukrainian offensive. And as a result, thousands of people have died. There have been slow, but nevertheless significant advances by the Russian military here. So defense industry cannot be abstracted from the equation as a simple plug and play. Oh, just take the technology. You need the whole corporate infrastructure, you need the culture, and you need investors who are able and willing to invest because they know that their investment is secure. We may not like that idea because, that I'm not going to invest unless I get my money plus back and make a profit. But as they say in Latin, tertium non datur. There's no third way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Very insightful. And I think you made a critical point that there is no comprehensive security strategy, military strategy for Ukraine winning the war without an industrial strategy. I think that is absolutely important. It reminds me that there is something called the Defense Reform Advisory Board, wonderful acronym of DRAB, that has existed, but it has existed to advise the Ukrainian defense industry. We had General Abizaid as the U.S. rep to that at one point, and we had Don Winter as the U.S. rep to that. And to my knowledge, that position has remained vacant for the last couple of years. Why we don't have somebody focused on this, I don't know. I think we have about 15 minutes, if I'm correct. I'm looking for our guidance here. I think we have about 15 minutes for questions. And so we'll take I see 2 hands already. We'll take those 2 and we'll try to go in pairs if we can. So first, right here.
Hi, I was reading a recent report. There was a statement by the Secretary General of NATO, Jan Stolberg. He talked about a critical shortage in terms of ammunition, and some of which you gentlemen highlighted. But the numbers sort of really concern me. So earlier, it was mentioned by one of the panelists, 20 to 25,000 rounds per day fired by the Russians. And that's the entire defense production of Europe for a month in terms of shells. Even 200,000 shells produced by the Ukrainians in a year, that equates to what, about 2 months worth of ammo? This is going to have to be, excuse my language, but an ass to tip operation by all allies, America, Europe, Ukraine together, in order to meet the ammunition demand that Defense Minister Reznikov expressed. He wants 1 million rounds within 6 months. I don't see that happening with these kinds of numbers. If you gentlemen could comment, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
we'll take that one, and right here in the front row.
Thanks. 2 questions. One is, what is the longest range strike weapon that domestically produced? Would it be the Volker M? Is that and how what's the range? And then you talk about the UJ-22 drone. I guess one of them was found 70 miles from Moscow. You talk about those 2 systems.
So the drone, and the first question was, what is the longest range projectile that Ukraine now manufactures? Is that right? Okay. All right. Who wants to go on these questions? You want to start off, Ivan?
Currently, we're manufacturing a limited production of Soviet-type projectiles, which can hit the target on maximum distance up to 30 kilometers. The production, which I have been talking about, is still under construction. It's going to be capable to produce up to 200,000 pieces, including 155 projectile, which will be capable to hit the target on the distance of 42 kilometers. If we modify that projectile and put a small propellant piece inside, it's so-called base bleed projectile, it's going to be able to hit the target on the distance up to 70 kilometers. But this is the future. Talking about missiles, we have domestically made missiles, MLRS, called Vilha. This is a modification of Soviet-type Smerch of 300 millimeter. That modification was able to hit the target precisely because it has a guidance system on the distance of 110 kilometers. And should we boost military technical cooperation with our allies right now, I believe we're going to be capable to produce missile modifications, this Vilha missile, which will be capable to hit the target on the distance of 150 kilometers, which is not ATACMS, of course, but still it's not bad. It's far better than we have right now. And moreover, talking about firepower, it has 500 pounds of explosive. You should also take that into account. Talking about drones, we have Soviet drone, so-called Tu-141, which given that it is provided a better guidance system and given that some parts of fuel being replaced by explosive could be used to target distance destinations, like, for example, airports in Engels, which was probably subjects. I'm not claiming that it was specifically that weapon, but okay.
Which Volker used the 100 kilometer Volker was that used in combat?
Which one?
Volker?
Vilha? Yeah, yes, the several pieces been used in combat. I cannot disclose the exact information which target was deployed, engaged. Yes, because initial depot where they were stored has received the strikes of Russian missiles like first week after the starting of full-scale assault, but by that date, most of the items, including stocks of Neptune missile, the anti-ship missile, and Vilha missiles, were already moved out of there, and we have deployed them later on the targets.
Okay.
So there is a capacity
Yeah.
capability.
Very interesting. And Wes, I know you want to jump in, so please do. And we do want to answer the question about the numbers on artillery shells. But Wes, to you.
Look, we've got to produce sufficient artillery shells as soon as possible to be able to not only withstand what the Russians are firing, but to overwhelm what they're firing. It's just simply a fact. Quality is important. HIMARS is wonderful. Excalibur is wonderful. But if you don't have enough rounds and enough tubes to win the counter-fire battle, you cannot prevail on the battlefield. And I've heard people from the Defense Department say, well, don't try to win the counter-fire battle, just do fire and maneuver and use maneuver and combined arms. If you don't have aircraft, attack helicopters, self-propelled artillery, you don't have combined arms. And so the easiest remedy is the artillery. We just need to mass the artillery powder and projos in there as rapidly as we can right now as the first priority. This is what's necessary. Secondly, I think, the Smersh rocket, the 300 millimeter rocket, Ukraine can produce it. It should be being produced. It should be mounted in a different fashion. It doesn't have to be, it can be on a truck, just like HIMARS. It can have GPS in it. You can get the chips. You can make that rocket very accurate. You can put the thermobaric warhead in it, and you can use that rocket to do anything that's necessary. You've had thermobarics used against you. You must be able to use thermobarics. You cannot penetrate that defensive line that's being put up in the south without thermobarics.
That's what we try to coordinate.
Yeah, this, and what you didn't hear, what Ivan just said is these are the things that the Ukrainian defense industry very much wants to coordinate with the Western defense industry. They can do it if they get the technical assistance.
We need rocket fuel, for example. We don't have rocket fuel in home. It was in Russia, it was in China, it was in the United States, maybe in India. But of those countries, only United States could help us with the rocket fuel.
Okay. Is there another audience question?
We didn't answer his first question.
Well, on the numbers, yeah, Steve, do you want to do that?
Yeah, let me speak to what you said. I mean, there's only one way you're going to get the numbers, and that's for the political will to do something. Because the Pentagon, for example, is, according to my information, has been slow rolling everything. And I think you can see that from the way this has gone on. But it's not just so it's up to us to influence the political will. I mean, those of us sitting there and the other people who are writing and talking about Ukraine, we have to influence the political will. But we have to remember, we have the quality. We do need the quantity so that to make that quality maximally effective. And that's the point we need to make, that if you get this stuff to the front, where Ukrainian soldiers and commanders can use it to its maximum effect, you can achieve tactical, if not even operational and maybe strategic success because of the combination of quality and quantity. The Russians are not going to have quality, and they're burning up their quantity anyway. So this is the answer.
No, I would like to add also from business perspective. I would like everybody to be aware that 155 standard artillery round has a price of $2,000 to $4,000. So if you are talking about millions, just multiply and guess who's going to finance that budget. And this is a pretty standard one. I'm not talking about Excaliburs. Excaliburs is a totally different story. This is 100,000. I'm talking about standard round without long distance base bleeds capacity. This is standard round, $2,000 to $4,000.
Okay, is there one more question from the audience? Yes, in the back.
Hello. I haven't heard anyone address the South Korean possibility. South Korea has been doing a lot to backfill NATO countries, NATO arsenals in Europe, but they also have, if not the largest, probably the second largest to the US stockpiles of NATO standard artillery and ammunition and production capacity.
Okay, can we get North Korea to step in?
As a representative from Pyongyang.
South Korea.
I can briefly report what I have discovered on that subject. I have just arrived from Abu Dhabi from IDEX exhibition, and I met two companies, company Pungsan, which is the largest producer of the ammunition, what you're talking about, and the company Hamva. This is a producer of propellant. I asked them directly, can you sell to Ukraine? They said, not at the moment. Perhaps through third countries, maybe, but not at the moment either. So I took the contacts, and once they are ready to do so, be sure we will be there.
Okay, yeah. South Korea would make an excellent supply. Nevertheless, I mean, you have to understand their own security situation, and presumably the contracts they have signed, which are legally binding, which probably inhibits their ability to transfer this to a country at war. Their own security situation obviously is not enviable. North Korea is building nukes as fast as they can. South Korea, although it has flirted with the idea of building its own nuclear weapons, has decisively opted to remain within the United States strategic umbrella. But that requires them to maximize their own artillery capabilities. This gets back to the point that that stockpile is their insurance. So you have to, and I think, you know, anybody asking them has to understand that it's vital to them, and I mean that literally, vital to them, that they have that insurance. Because in the back of the mind is the fear that we may abandon them.
Yeah. Okay, we have, we're out of time, but I'm going to ask one final question to Wes that I've been itching to ask. Former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, so responsible not only for the ground forces, but the air and sea as well. What can we do? What would it take to restore freedom of navigation in the Black Sea so that the port of Odessa can function as a normal port?
Yeah, well, I think you've got to put some NATO warships into the Black Sea, and you've got to then put them in with the capacity to defend themselves. So you can't have one NATO warship in there. You've got to have multiple warships, and it has to be in agreement with Russia. And they have to understand they're going to back off. So hopefully, as part of whatever happens this autumn, that there's going to be that understanding. My solution on my concern is that Ukraine will never be safe unless Ukraine controls Crimea. And that's just a fact. And it's not only from the naval warfare standpoint, but it's also for the economic value in the Black Sea. And, you know, the economic engagement zone from Crimea really impedes Ukraine. So I'd like to see a standing NATO force deployed in the Black Sea. I'd like to see it work in conjunction with Ukraine. I'd like to see it go in there as soon as possible. Could it go in there right now? Absolutely, it could. I'd like to see it have UN auspices, but short of UN, if the UN won't authorize it, then regional security organizations should. You've got a global food security crisis all over because of this backup of shipping. So Turkey's got to do its part. Turkey's not clearing those ships at the rate it should. And if no one will step forward from the United Nations, then I think NATO should step forward and secure the sea lanes, at least so commerce can occur even before what happens in autumn.
I'm going to, Steve wants to comment on this too, but I want to pick up what you just said, Wes. That's a brilliant idea. The Western Black Sea littoral states are all members of NATO. So they would have a reason and an interest in ensuring freedom of navigation in the Western Black Sea, all touching their own maritime boundaries. Steve.
Let me build on what General Clark said. One, you have to persuade Turkey to rethink the Montreux Treaty or its conduct in closing the Black Sea to all shipping. You have to get them to amend that decision, maybe to allow the Allies, but not the Russians, in there. Second, when Allied shipping can get in, as we're talking about warships, to be frank, when Allied warships come in, they have to be properly protected, which means minesweepers, air defenses. Second, in 1950, when North Korea attacked South Korea, we went to the UN General Assembly and we got a resolution called Uniting for Peace. That was the legal basis for the American and everybody else's participation in the Korean War. And it's still the legal basis for all the troops outside of South Korea that are presently located in South Korea. I don't understand why this administration can't go to the UN and get a similar General Assembly and get a similar resolution. You're not going to get it in the Security Council. And then you have UN authority to send in ships into the Black Sea. And third, in October, the Lend-Lease legislation, which Walter knows I've been screaming about for 8 years, was passed. Have you heard of anybody doing Lend-Lease in the 5 months since? No. When we had Lend-Lease in World War II, I can assure you that the minute this became a law, those ships were out, and the deal with Great Britain and then with Soviet Union, where the amount supplied to the Soviet Union is immense, as historians have recorded. So we have the law on the books. We can use it. Why aren't we doing it? I don't know the answer. But again, it gets back to this excessive political caution and lack of will. And what I also frankly said before, lack of strategic intelligence.
All right. Well, that's a very interesting, robust panel. Thank you so much, all of you. Wes on the screen, it's great to see you. Ivan, thank you. And Steve, thank you. Walter, back to you. I guess we have a quick change here.
All of you still here, and I just wanted, with General Clark still here, I just wanted to say, you have proven the notion then that the Americans know what they're talking about when they said that the armed services man is all about logistics. Because in some ways, I said land, sea, air is one thing, and you guys are going to be talking about military industrial, but it's logistics. And our combat commanders, Clark, Breedlove, Ben Hodges, have always said, if you got an army that can deliver cakes like in World War II, fresh from Boston to the Battle of the Bulge, you know that you've got it right. And that's what you're insisting on, that we go back to that concept, that we get there with the mostest and the bestest and stuff. And thank you very much, guys. This was absolutely fabulous. This is as good as it gets. It really was. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I will give 1 minute for a coffee break, and then we really do. 1 minute for a coffee break, and whatever munchies are out there, and then we do have to move, because I don't want the tables to move on us.
Okay. Well, let's see where he goes. I'd like you to go first. It's very nice.
Okay, this is a mic check. Can somebody hear me?
Ariel, it's Roman. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, we can hear
Yeah, this is Roman. I hear you, Ariel.
Very good. Hello, Ambassador.
How are you?
So we're going to start imminently. Do I have a minute to get myself some water?
Go for the water, Ariel. That's okay. We'll wait for you.
All right. Hey. Well, I'm about to start. Also did Al Jazeera today. US-Russia competition in Central